The axe fell with a rhythm born of grief, each swing a punctuation mark in a silent, unending sentence. Elias worked in the biting wind. His world shrunk to the radius of his homestead, a scar of warmth and light against the vast, indifferent white of the mountain. Snow clung to the pines, heavy as shrouds, and the air was so cold it felt brittle, ready to shatter. Behind him, the cabin window glowed, a lone ember in the encroaching dusk. Inside were his girls, Rose, Lily, and Daisy. 3 identical faces, 3 pairs of eyes that held the same ghost of their mother's smile, a memory that was both his anchor and his heaviest chain. He had built this life of isolation piece by piece, a fortress of solitude to keep the world out and his sorrow in. The thud of the axe was his only conversation, the burn in his muscles his only penance. He finished splitting the last log, the wood yielding with a clean crack. As he stacked the pieces against the cabin wall, a movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. It was wrong. Nothing moved in this weather but the wind and the ghosts. A figure, dark and ragged, stumbled through the deepening snow, a scarecrow fighting a gale. It reeled, corrected, then fell, a crumpled heap of black against the blinding white. For a long moment Elias did nothing. His first instinct, honed over 4 years of solitude, was to turn away, to go inside and bar the door. This was not his concern. The world and its troubles were meant to stay on the other side of the ridge. Then a small face pressed against the cabin window. Then another and another. "Papa!" A voice, thin as glass, carried through the thick logs. "There's a lady in the snow." The word, lady, felt foreign, an artifact from another time. He looked from the fallen shape to the window where his daughters stood, their breath fogging the pain. He sighed, the sound a plume of white in the frozen air, and trudged forward, his boots sinking deep. She was half buried, her face the color of skimmed milk, lips a faint, bruised blue. A dark gash sliced across her forehead, beaded with frozen blood. Her clothes were threadbare, useless against the mountain's fury. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. Inside, the warmth of the fire was a shock. He laid her on the bearskin rug before the hearth, his daughters gathering around like cautious fawns. He peeled away her wet, frozen shawl, revealing hands raw and scraped, a thinness to her frame that spoke of long-running hardship. He sent the girls for water and clean cloths, his movements economical, practiced. He had seen death before. He worked to keep it from crossing his threshold again. He cleaned the wound on her forehead, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were calloused from the axe and the plow. He wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, then sat back on his heels, watching the slow, shallow rise and fall of her chest. The firelight danced across her face, softening the harsh lines of desperation. The girls were silent, their usual chatter silenced by the gravity of the intrusion. They simply watched, their expressions identical masks of solemn curiosity. The woman, this piece of the broken world he had fled, was now breathing his air, warmed by his fire, and he felt a profound and unwelcome disquiet. He had built his walls so high, yet the wind had blown the world right to his door. Lena woke to the smell of wood smoke and stew. A dull throb pulsed in her head. She was warm, impossibly warm, swaddled in something heavy and soft. Panic flared, cold and sharp. She tried to sit up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. A large shadow moved nearby. A man. His face was stark, carved from granite and shadow, a thick beard hiding his mouth. His eyes, though, were what held her. They were pale gray, like a winter sky before a storm, and they held a deep, settled sorrow she recognized as a mirror to her own. "Easy." His voice was low, rough like gravel. Your safety was a word she no longer understood. She scrambled backward, clutching the blanket to her chest. 3 small girls peeked out from behind the man's legs, their eyes wide and dark. They were identical, like a set of nesting dolls, each a perfect miniature of the others. One of them, braver than the rest, stepped forward. She pointed a small finger at Lena. "You look cold." the girl said, her voice clear and certain. You need a warm bath. The simple, childish declaration cut through Lena's terror. A bath. The thought of it, of sinking into clean, hot water, was a luxury so distant it felt like a dream. The man, their father, watched her, his expression unreadable. He gave a curt nod, then turned and began filling a large copper tub near the fire with water heated on the stove. He worked without a word, his movements efficient, while the girls watched Lena. When it was ready, he placed a stack of folded clothes on a stool, a man's flannel shirt, soft with wear, and woolen trousers. The girls and I will be outside, he said, not quite meeting her eye. Call if you need anything. He shepherded his daughters out into the cold, closing the heavy door behind them, leaving Lena alone in the sudden, profound quiet of the cabin. She slid into the water, the heat a blissful agony on her frozen skin. She washed away the grime of the road, the dirt of her flight, but the deeper stains of fear and loss remained. When she emerged, wrapped in the blanket again, she saw the girls had come back inside and were sitting in a neat row on a bench, waiting. She dressed in the borrowed clothes. They were huge on her, but they were warm and clean. The man came back in, a blast of cold air following him. He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. She ate, the hot broth chasing away the last of the chill. They existed in silence for days. The blizzard raged, locking them inside a world of white noise and firelight. Elias spoke little, his words reserved for his daughters. Lena spoke not at all, her voice trapped behind a wall of trauma. The girls became the bridge. They would bring her things: a smooth stone from the hearth, a doll carved from birchwood, a storybook they wanted her to read. She would listen, her fingers tracing the pictures, a small, hesitant smile occasionally touching her lips. One afternoon, as she was helping mend one of their dresses, the needle clumsy in her hand, the smallest of the three, Daisy, climbed into her lap. She looked up at Lena, her head tilted. Our mama went to be a star, she said matter-of-factly. Papa says she's the brightest one. Lena's hands stilled. She looked at Elias, who was sharpening a knife by the fire, his back to them. His shoulders were rigid. I'm sorry, Lena whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. He didn't turn. It was a long time ago, but she could hear in his voice that it wasn't. It was yesterday. It was this morning. The next day, Lily, the quietest one, sat beside her. We need a wife for our father, she stated, not with malice or mischief, but with the stark, unfiltered honesty of a child. He's lonely. Lena's breath caught. Heat flooded her face. Elias, who had been checking the woodpile by the door, froze. He turned, a dark look clouding his features. Lily, that's enough. His voice was sharp, a warning. The girl flinched, her eyes filling with tears. Lena felt a pang of defensiveness for the child. She meant no harm, Lena said softly. Elias's gaze snapped to hers. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, not as a burden or a patient, but as a person. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the strength beneath the fear. He saw the way she held his daughter's hand. He saw a flicker of something he thought had died with his wife. Hope. He said nothing, just gave a short, sharp nod and turned back to his work. But the atmosphere in the small cabin had shifted. A fragile trust had taken root in the frozen ground of their shared grief. The storm outside finally broke, leaving behind a world of pristine, sculpted snow and blinding sunlight. But with the clear skies came a new threat. Elias was scanning the valley from the porch when he saw it. A lone rider, a black speck moving steadily up the mountain pass. It was not a neighbor. He knew the tracks of every man within 20 miles. This rider moved with a grim purpose. He went inside. Lena was laughing, a soft, breathy sound, as Rose tried to braid her hair. The sound was so unexpected, so beautiful, it made his chest ache. He hated to silence it. He walked to the stone mantelpiece and took down the rifle that rested there. He didn't have to say a word. Lena's laughter died. The color drained from her face. She knew. Is it? She whispered, her hands flying to her throat. A man is coming, was all he said. his voice flat as he began methodically cleaning the weapon. The quiet competence of the action was more terrifying than any shout. "It's him," she breathed, her eyes wide with a familiar terror. "Silas, my husband's brother. He said I wouldn't get away." Elias slid a cartridge into the chamber. The click was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He looked at his daughters, huddled now beside Lena. "Girls, go to your room. Stay there until I come for you." They obeyed without question, their small faces pale. He turned to Lena. "Stay behind me." Silas didn't bother to knock. The cabin door flew open with a splintering crash, kicked in by a heavy boot. The man who stood there was large and florid, his face flushed with cold and arrogance. His eyes, small and cruel, landed on Lena with a triumphant sneer. "There you are, you thieving whore," he spat, his gaze sweeping over the cabin with contempt before dismissing Elias entirely. "Thought you could run to the mountains? There's nowhere I won't find you. You owe me." He took a step inside, reaching for her. Elias moved. He wasn't fast, but he was immovable, a block of granite between the predator and his prey. "She owes you nothing," Elias said, his voice a low growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. "This is my home. You will leave." Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is between me and my brother's widow. It has nothing to do with some backwoods hermit. Get out of my way before I move you." He lunged for Lena's arm. Elias's hand shot out, not to strike, but to catch Silas's wrist in a grip of iron. Silas grunted in surprise and pain, his arrogance momentarily faltering. He tried to yank his arm free, but Elias held fast. With his other hand, Silas reached for the pistol tucked in his belt. In a blur of motion, Elias twisted Silas's arm, using the man's own momentum to spin him around and slam him face first against the wall. The pistol clattered to the floor. Elias kicked it away. He didn't hit him, didn't use the rifle leaning against the table. He simply held the bigger man, neutralizing him with a cold, terrifying efficiency that spoke of a past filled with a violence he had worked hard to bury. "You will not touch her," Elias breathed, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "You will not speak to her. You will leave this mountain and you will never return. If I see your face again, the snow will be your grave." He shoved Silas toward the broken door, pushing him out into the cold. The man stumbled, regained his footing, and glared back, his face a mask of hate and humiliation. He opened his mouth to say something, but the look in Elias's eyes, the look of a man with nothing left to lose, who had just found something worth protecting, silenced him. Silas turned and fled, scrambling for his horse. Elias slammed what was left of the door shut, the sound echoing the finality of his words. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the whimpering of the girls from their room and the ragged sound of Elias's breathing. He stood with his back to Lena, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He was trembling, not from the fight, but from the effort of containing the rage that had slept within him for so long. He had been forced to become the man he thought he'd left behind. Lena came to him, her steps hesitant. She didn't speak. She didn't offer thanks or platitudes. Instead, she reached out and gently took his hand, turning it over. Her fingers traced the long, faded scar that ran from his wrist to his knuckles, a silent testament to an old wound. He finally looked at her, and the storm in his eyes had begun to calm. He saw not pity, but understanding. He saw not fear, but a shared strength. He let out a long, slow breath and turned, his gaze falling on the splintered doorframe. Without a word, he went to his toolbox and began to work, finding solace in the simple, honest act of repair. A few moments later, Lena began to cut vegetables for a stew, the rhythmic chop of the knife a quiet answer to the sound of his hammer. The girls crept out of their room, their fear replaced by a tentative curiosity. Rose picked up the discarded pistol and, holding it by the barrel as if it were a dead snake, handed it to her father. He took it and methodically unloaded it before placing it back on the high mantel, returning the weapon to its slumber. The cabin was filled with the sounds of mending, of cooking, of quiet life resuming. The broken door was being made whole. The terror had been cast out. That evening, they ate at the table together, the repaired door holding fast against the wind. No promises were spoken, no vows were made, but as Elias looked at the woman and the three small girls who mirrored her quiet strength, he knew his isolation was over. He was no longer just a man haunted by ghosts in a lonely cabin. This was a home, and it was worth protecting.